What is up, everybody? Welcome back to an all-new episode of the Pack a Day Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You can find the podcast at Pack a Day Podcast. You know my guest. It's been far too long. The one and only Mike Wahle. You can find him on social media at Mike Wahle 68. Mike, I hope your offseason is going fantastic. I know it's not the offseason for you as you're still coaching, or not coaching, but doing player development over in Germany. But how are you doing, my friend?
Andy, good to see you. I'm doing well. Like we were just talking off air, I'm back to Frankfurt tonight for I think we're 5 or 6 games into the season over there. So I think it's a 12-game regular season plus playoffs, and we go through September. So it's like the way that I come over here and I work with some guys, and then I go back over there and go to football. So I just realized, like, probably 4 months ago, that I have literally no longer have like an off season anymore. I've managed to like double my workload despite not playing. So I don't know how I screwed this up, but it's a lot of fun. So life goes on.
I know that feeling of no off season very well, as we do this 365 days a year. Not, I'm sure, to the extent of some of the stuff that you're doing and flying back and forth, but I know that feeling very well. But hopefully get a little rest and relaxation time this summer. But it's been a hot second, Mike, since we've had the opportunity to talk last. Obviously, we wrapped up the season, and then the Packers have gone through an entire offseason of free agent signings, draft picks. A little bit of drama here and there, Jair Alexander, what's going on with Elgton Jenkins right now. So want to pick your brain on a lot of this stuff. And I think probably the best place to start, just obviously with your extensive background in offensive line knowledge, is on the offensive line, and certainly some big moves that they made there. I want to start with Aaron Banks, their biggest free agent signing, 4 years, $77 million. Had the opportunity recently to start kind of going through some of the Aaron Banks snaps from this past year in greater detail. But what have you seen from him, and what can he potentially bring to this offensive line in 2025 and beyond?
I think the simplest way to play this, because we've talked about the 49ers offensive line without Trent Williams. Oh, you and I've talked about it a lot.
Yep.
And kind of where we think everybody stacks on that line. I think the easiest way to play this for Packers fans is you rid yourself of Josh Myers and you brought in Aaron Banks. And Aaron Banks is a better player than Josh Myers. And I think that's probably the easiest way to look, or the most positive way to look at this. All the drama that you're seeing with Elgton Jenkins right now, I believe you and I talked about this ad nauseum, because this was, at least from my very limited understanding of how money works, but when you're going to get paid a lot less to play a position, when you're the best player at the other position, that usually pisses you off and forces you to do something drastic and dramatic, like hold out or whatnot. So, there's a lot of moving parts here. The way that it was communicated with, or not communicated with Elgin, I think was interesting, the way it kind of came back later on. And I don't know, what the latest is there. I haven't been paying too much attention, but it went from, oh yeah, he's on board with this completely, to, yeah, we talked to him about it, to he's not on board and he's holding out right now and he wants a new contract. So I think at the surface level, Aaron Banks is, yeah, he's a solid guard in the National Football League. I was kind of looking at this when they picked him up as, okay, they're definitely moving him to right guard, because why would you move your arguably your best interior lineman, your second best offensive lineman, but the best guard you have on the team, why would you move him away from guard? But that's what they decided to do. And, maybe they thought that Elgin was going to say, well, I'll be an all-pro and I'll take Creed Humphrey's spot at first team all-pro if I move to center. And so they convinced him of that. All that stuff is always, we're going to speculate forever, but just from a kind of X's and O's standpoint, I thought it was a weird move to, you have needs at other positions. Why bring in a guy who doesn't fill one of those needs? That said, he is a better player than Josh Myers. So if you look at your starting five and you replace Josh Myers with Aaron Banks, you're a better starting five than you were last year. So I think that's my long-winded way of saying I'm kind of like this.
I totally feel that as well. I totally understand that. I think that is a great way to look at it, though. How Elgton plays at center, I think, he can be a big upgrade from Josh. And I think you obviously have Banks filling in for Elgton in that left guard spot. And you ultimately end up in the aggregate replacing Myers with Banks. And I do think that that's a hopefully significant upgrade. And we saw Myers did not have much of a market on the open market, 1 year, $3 million deal in New York, not even destined to be a starter at the moment with the Jets either, which is an interesting move for him. But I do think overall the offensive line is improved. Whether or not he can take that step from being, again, just a solid, nice piece along the offensive line, one of your top five, to being a player that's worth 4 years, 77. I think that's going to be another journey in and of itself. But hopefully Green Bay sees something and can unlock him, and, playing with an offensive line that has some solid players all across it, and Elton next to him on one side, although he had Trent Williams next to him in San Fran for a lot of it. So I'm not sure how much I can make that argument, but still, hopefully it ends up being a great situation for him, and somehow, Butkus and company can unlock him and get him to an entirely different level. Of course, another offensive lineman that they go and get is Anthony Belton in the second round of the draft. That's another, and again, big human being, very interesting piece, can probably play tackle or guard. At least that's the stating from the Packers. And as of right now, he's been playing primarily at left tackle and right tackle in OTAs and mini camps. My guess is they maybe put a little bit more on his plate in training camp, but we'll have to wait and see for that. But what did you see from Belton in his college tape?
Obviously, huge body, has decent feet. He needs to practice playing out of a 3-point stance and just learn how to play lower if he wants to play guard at the NFL level. I don't know if that's going to be a long-term position for him, but certainly with his size, it'd be really interesting to get, those 330 plus pound guys in the middle and just see what happens. Because obviously, you look at like Zach Tom, Zach Tom's our best guy, but he probably, on a good day weighs 308, 310.
Yep.
So if you put like a really solid guy who's a 335, 340 pound dude, it's got good footwork, and you can start moving, that helps with the double teams and everything. And then, you all of a sudden have a really good, right side of the offensive line. I like the idea that they've gone away, that they went away from this one time, kind of athleticism, and just went towards like, let's just get a big hulking guy that we think can move bodies, because we see that other teams are having a lot of success with that. So I like that as a thought experiment, and we'll see how it plays out. I don't know that he has, I just, it's funny. We go back to last year they drafted Jordan Morgan, and we're kind of in the same going like, okay, I'm not really sure where he fits in. He's a more athletic guy. He's a weight room warrior. We like everything you hear from Arizona. You love him, but you don't know where he's actually going to play. And obviously knowing that he's a first round pick, he's going to get multiple opportunities. They're probably trying to wedge him into Rasheed Wallace's spot. Rasheed Wallace, by the way, through this whole thing has dealt with this really well, because Rasheed Walker, excuse me. Because I always talk about our Detroit Pistons friend.
I remember him well. Yep.
But he deals with this so well, because I was talking with multiple left tackles, NFL left tackles that are playing right now last week about him, and they're like, the guy's going to get close to $20 million a year.
Yep.
He's earned it. They amongst his peers, they think he's good. And so this whole thing of Jordan Morgan's going to come in and take his job and this and that, it's just it's very interesting how this whole offseason's playing out with all these different picks. But with Belton specifically, I do like the size. I do think right now he's just not equipped from a bend standpoint to play guard, but he's definitely somebody, if you could get him to play in a 3-point and get him a little bit lower, yeah, you got something there. I think particularly when you pair him with a guy like Tom.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting just group of offensive linemen in general. And we know the Packers, they're just going to fit these pieces together however they will, week in and week out. I could definitely even see some rotations. The Rasheed Walker thing always has confused me, because they would be out there every single week telling you that Josh Myers is playing the best football of his career and that he's played, they're thrilled with him. And then anytime you get asked about Rasheed Walker, it's yeah, he's still got a lot of improvement to go. And it's Rasheed's playing good. I've always been stunned that he just hasn't gotten the credit. And to your point, we saw some of the free agent market this past, Dan Moore getting 20 million plus per year, going from Pittsburgh to over to Tennessee. There have been some big time money thrown around for some, solid, but maybe unspectacular offensive tackles. And Rasheed's set to, again, be very much in that conversation if he can just get out there and play, and that he doesn't have to, lose snaps to Jordan Morgan or Anthony Belton or one of these guys. So for his sake, I'm hoping he can stay out there and continue to play. But Green Bay clearly wants the competition, and we'll see what happens. I think we might end up seeing some sort of rotation with Morgan and Walker.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think something like that is definitely going to happen, but we'll see. It's going to be interesting. What is your best iteration? If you had to put best 5 guys out there right now, how would you line these guys up left to right?
Left to right, Walker, Jenkins, either Banks or Ryan are playing center and left guard, and then Zach Tom. That's okay. I mean, yeah, I would prefer to have Banks and Jenkins at guard. I think Sean Ryan looks like a guy who could probably play center. Just
Yep.
from a movement standpoint, that kind of made sense to me. But of course, you need to learn how to stand. There's a lot of things that go along that. We don't know, like, what kind of communicator he is. So, just kind of looking at bodies and how they play and how they move. That's what I would have picked. But we'll see. Jacob Monk's in there, of course, as well as the guy that really is a good mover and could be helped by two pretty big guards. So you can kind of make up for some of that size disadvantage. But yeah, I really like it. I love the tackles right now. Maybe Jordan Morgan plays center. I don't know, but I look at Banks and Jenkins as you just look at like where are the threats on defense? Well, like defensive tackle, if you got a good defensive tackle, you're going to get just absolutely mauled. And if Dexter Lawrence is like I'm sure there's other good nose tackles, but there's only one Dexter Lawrence in the league,
Yeah.
and you might have to play him once every 2-3 years. So it's like, why would you take your best interior pass protector and put him at center? I just don't, I'll harp on it all day. That don't make any sense to me.
November 16th, assuming he's healthy, the Packers will play against said Dexter Lawrence with a very fun defensive line in New York now. They've already got Brian Burns, and then they go get Carter with the third pick, whatever it was, and the draft.
Thibodeau will be the nickel, coming in nickel.
Yeah.
You think about that. That's a big time pass rush.
The Giants know something about winning games with a front four in the past with Strahan, Kiwanuku, Umenyiora, and Justin Tuck as that pass rush back in the day as well. So don't know if this one will get that good, but that was a heck of one. And Dexter Lawrence, like you said, is the absolute beast, trendsetter, the king of the mountain at defensive tackle right now. He's so fun to watch. But yeah, I'm with you. I think you have to always look at where your opponent's best players are and put your players in positions to be successful. We'll see what Green Bay ultimately ends up with along that offensive line. Of course, it wasn't just offensive linemen and, that were taken in the draft and in free agency as well. They go and get Nate Hobbs, Isaiah Simmons, McCole Hardman, Matthew Golden in the first round, Savion Williams in the third. A lot of bodies added to that wide receiver room. Anything else that stood out to you in free agency, the draft, that, either you're excited about or just intrigued to see how it might work?
Well, obviously with Alexander leaving, you start trying to figure out where all the chess pieces fall in the secondary room. Do they have the right guys in the room right now? We'll have to see. Obviously, bringing in Hobbs is a big deal, but he was a nickel guy, so you have to do a little bit of shuffling there and squinting your eyes. But obviously, everybody is kind of still going, all right, well, who's going to create the pass rush? And nobody really has solved that quandary. And you would hope that bringing in a new defensive line coach, and maybe he has a different philosophy on how to rush the passer. You would hope that Rashawn Gary gets back to the level that he had, kind of pre-injury a couple of years ago. I do like the kid out of Texas. Sorrell, is it Sorrell or Sorrell?
Baron Sorrell, yep.
Yeah. I like him, but you're not going to rely on a rookie to provide that. I just don't see, quite frankly, with the draft, with free agency, I just don't see how they upgraded that room for what they needed specifically. And I'll even argue that losing TJ Slayton was a pretty big deal because I thought he was great, not good, but great against the run.
Yep.
For the majority of the year. And so, it just kind of makes you scratch your head and you go, coaching is a huge deal in the National Football League if you get a good one. And so if they found one that can really upgrade that line internally, I think that's fantastic. But otherwise, it'll be interesting to see how they create that pass rush, because we know that Hafley would prefer to not have to bring those linebackers as much as he does. But, we'll see.
Yeah, I think the DeMarcus Covington hire is going to be one that is going to definitely be worth monitoring in training camp. And they're basically banking that they have 4 first-round picks along that defensive line in LVN, Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt, and Rashawn Gary, that you ultimately at some point have to either make the decision that you made the wrong investments or that you have the wrong chef, that's cooking with the ingredients. And clearly Green Bay was not yet ready to admit that they maybe made the wrong investments and are hoping that DeMarcus Covington can come in and maybe utilize those 4 first-round picks a little bit better. They go and get the 4th rounder in Baron Sorrell, the 5th rounder in Colin Oliver, the 6th rounder in Warren Brinson as well to add to that defensive front. But yeah, I thought the just not really replacing TJ Slayton in any significant way outside of a 6th-round pick and an undrafted free agent in Brinson and Stackhouse was definitely interesting. But they clearly feel like they've got the pieces up front to still be successful. They seem very high on Carl Brooks and Colby Wooden. Colby Wooden put on a little bit of weight. So we'll see. I think that is, to me, a lot of people are talking about defensive back and specifically at corner. I still think the pass rush is the most intriguing to me because I just don't think you can win a Super Bowl with a subpar pass rush. I think it not only can it not be subpar, I think it has to be average, so above average to well above average, if not great. And I don't think we've seen that from Green Bay's pass rush yet.
Yeah, it's almost like, back in the day when Belichick was playing I think it was the Rams, and he basically was like, "Oh, we're just going to drop 8, rush 3, and make it cloudy for Warner because we don't know that we're going to be able to get to him anyway, so we might as well try to collapse that pocket and get more of that power rush and then have him hold the ball a little bit longer." So, the thought process, let's get him to hold the ball longer versus leave some spots open and rush more. And that might be the philosophy they go to this year, quite frankly. They go to, 7 or 8 defensive backs and they rush, they or not 8, but, they run a lot of penny and they rush 3 and we've got a lot of power rushing guys. So maybe you start looking like that. I don't really know what the answer is. Obviously, I like Carl Brooks and think he could take a leap this year. Wouldn't too, it's not like, listen, it's not like you don't like any of these guys. You like all of them, really. I mean, they're all good players. Like, I'm not trying to dump on them, but there's, quite frankly, if you don't have to game plan any of your players, like, you have a problem. If I walk in as an offensive lineman on Wednesday and I look at the state sheet and I go, "Oh, cool, we don't have to game plan anybody," like, that's a bad deal for the other team. You know what I mean? And right now there's not a play. I think Rashawn Gary 2 years ago was a guy like, "Oh, we got a game plan against him." But they probably don't feel that way right now. And hopefully he gets back to that status. But there's nobody else on that line. I mean, as much as I love Kenny and, none of those guys are game plan guys. And it's like you have to have at the defensive line position, you have to have a game plan guy in the National Football League now if you really want to be able to turn the Jets up. Or you just have to have a number of, like, second tier just studs. And I don't know I don't know where we fit in those categories.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the big question. And again, when you make those first round pick investments, you're hoping to get some of that ROI and some of those big time players. And it's going to take some of those guys stepping up to that level if this defensive end and defensive tackle group wants to get where I think they hope it can get to. I want to ask you something, and you can absolutely just tell me I'm an idiot if I'm wrong on this. We saw pass rush numbers on the whole go down a little bit this past year. Not even a little bit. I think it was a decent size decrease in pass rush productivity. The Packers were actually 8th in sacks this past year, which seems crazy. I think a lot of that was in 3 games against Seattle and Sam Howell, Will Levis in Tennessee, and the Miami game against Tua, where the Dolphins just basically no-showed that one. But they were still 8th in sacks, and they were like a few sacks away from being in like the top 5 pretty, easily. What I noticed, at least for me personally, is it felt like teams were a lot more willing to kind of chip or help on both sides, a running back and a tight end on each of the defensive ends. And you would go through it. And if you were rushing 4, you would get a chip on one side and the tackle would be, you get kind of almost 4 hands on him at some point. The center would help on both sides where you get 4, maybe 3 or 4 hands on one defensive tackle. Then the center would kind of go over and help on the other. And then again, you have the tight end or running back chipping on the other side. And you go through and you watch a pass rush rep, and there's not a single guy on a 4-man rush that gets a one-on-one opportunity in that entire rush. They're getting help at some point during the course of the process, which of course makes it very difficult to sort of navigate unless you're one of these top rushers. And you see the 3-man route, and then you see the tight end and the running back kind of do little checkdowns after they did their responsibility along the offensive line or helping out there. Is this something that you saw a little bit more of? Is it different than when you played, or am I just maybe seeing ghosts as I'm watching tape?
You are. I think that you're right. You are seeing a lot more. Like, I watched an entire game last week where I would say 95% of the snaps, you got a tight end chip and a running back chip, whether it was the C gap or the B gap.
Yep.
And you're getting, so, effectively what used to happen in a 4-man, right? If you're playing against good guys, you'd get a chip, you get a slide. And so there'd always be one guy who was by himself. And it was like every play, it was different. Every play, somebody was going to get, had to own up on every play, but it was like not every single play in a row. So they never really knew. And you mixed up where your back, was aligned, and try to give different looks, etc. Now they're doing it a lot more. They being kind of the communal league and subsequent leagues. they're doing it a lot more where we're just going to line up those tight ends and receivers just one by one off of, like, we got that split flow look all the time. We're just going to line them up there, and we're going to always ship out. And, what effectively used to happen was if you walked up you just double mug the linebacker, and then you kind of force those guys to stay in. Well, now they're like, okay, we'll play chicken with you. We still think our quarterback can buy time and hit the release route after the guy bangs out. And if those linebackers come, well, you're in a lot of trouble because there's, he's got green grass in front of him. And so it's always been kind of that chess match. But I think what's happening now is the offensive coordinator's ability to scheme up ways to defeat defenses was ahead for a number of years, like eons ahead of defenses. Sure. And now we're starting to get a lot more match play on the back end of defenses, and so it's tightening up. And so what's happening is they're being, as a consequence, they're being forced to give the quarterback a little bit more time because there's not these like windows they know they can go to all the time, right? And sure. So we're seeing that a little bit, I think. And I think the other thing is, quite frankly, this is a quarterback-driven league. You do not want your guy on the ground. And, the way that everything is set up now, it is so easy. And how many times do you see the Green Bay Packers bang out with their tight end, and then he just kind of like flutters out into some 5-yard route, and it's like, oh, he just picked up 20. I mean, that is a realistic offensive play now, where I think that used to be a check down. That is like not a first option play, but it's a play that they're calling to throw the release route.
Yeah, and I like these iterations too, where you've got, maybe a tight end and a running back helping, and then at the end, the tight end goes out in the flat for the running back who swings out, and it's almost like a mini screenplay on the outside where you've now got the tight end in front of the running back as well. Just different iterations, different options where, again, it's more than just a check down, but those guys are helping out on the offensive line. It just makes things, again, very difficult for the defense, but of course the defense is doing a lot of unique things as well, as you mentioned. I love that's like the stuff that I just love, and like the cat and mouse game, or the game of chess, however you want to call it, of again, and these things end up being cyclical of, all right, now the offense finds a counter for it, so the defense does something different, which the offense, and it just goes back and forth for forever. And again, that's, I think, one of the really cool parts of the game. But I thought last year the offense and really slowing down the pass rush was just a tick ahead of maybe the defenses this past year, which was interesting to see.
Part of it too is like you watch the Eagles. Like the Eagles don't have that problem.
No,
why? Well, it's because every one of their guys can rush. Yeah. So this only works if you have sub-sufficient linemen across the board somewhere. Like if you have guys that can rush everywhere, you got a real problem, right? And I think that this goes back to, and listen, when in the National Football League, what's really happened is there used to be on every team one guy. Like in the '90s, late '90s, there was one guy on every team who could not rush. Period. I mean, literally, Andy, you could go out there and block him 9 times out of 10. Like he could not pass rush. You know what I mean? Yep. Now everybody can pass. It used to be the guy over the right tackle because, it just was a fact. And then all the good players went over to the right tackle because they saw those stats. And now everybody can rush a little bit, but you usually find one guy where you're like, I feel good about this one-on-one. And so it's the only way to defeat all of the stuff we talk about, like the offensive, defensive, deep blue versus, Google AI or whatever, coordinating, systems and schemes. Sure. The only way to actually defeat it is to get players, coach them up really well, and have them be able to win their 1v1 matchups. And that's why the teams, like, we can talk about all the schemes and systems, and it's fun to talk about. It's fun to watch, and how, but the reality is, like, whoever learns how to coach their guys up to win is a team that's going to be okay over the course of the long term. And that truth always comes back kind of glaring to me in these situations.
Team that won the Super Bowl last year, pretty damn good in the trenches on both sides of the football, and is a huge reason that they ultimately won the Super Bowl this past year, which is also why I think we saw a lot of offensive linemen and especially defensive tackles go very, very early in the draft. And those guys flew off the board in free agency as well, including the highest paid free agent this past offseason, Milton Williams, going over from that Philadelphia Eagles team to New England. Josh Sweat from Philadelphia got a huge contract. in Arizona as well. So yeah, we'll see how Philly bounces back from losing a couple of those players, but they've reloaded again, and that's still going to be, I think, a very good defensive and offensive front for them. Really quick, I don't want to spend a ton of time on it because I think everyone's just burnt out by it a little bit at this point. But your thoughts on the entire Jair Alexander situation, him moving on, and then kind of what that means for the defensive backfield moving forward.
Jair Alexander's a unique personality with a unique talent and skill set. And sometimes when things are going well and you're healthy, that package is not tolerable is the wrong word, but you're like easy trade-off. And then unfortunately, you sign a big contract and you get hurt, and all of a sudden that trade-off, those waters are a little murkier. And I think that's all that happened here. I mean, I really like the way the guy plays. Obviously, some of the sideshow stuff, you can take it or leave it. It's not for everybody. I don't have firsthand experience of what he was like in the locker room, what his teammates thought of him, and some of the antics. But you know that generally, like anything that takes away from the brand at all is usually generally considered like, that's not what we're trying to do, right? So, when those things happen and you get injured, the inevitability is like, okay, we're going to try to jettison you as fast as possible. I thought the thing that was interesting here was, given the way that this all played out, first of all, it worked out really well for him. He goes to a phenomenal team with a phenomenal and historic defense. But it also seemed like, I think both teams, but it seemed like both sides were pretty happy to be done with each other. And as the tenure of this staff and everything, continues to move forward, and you get these players that get on there, are part of it, enter as a younger team and get into the second contract. It'll be really interesting to see. I mean, that's the, from a team dynamic standpoint, that actually is the really hard thing to do, is once you grow and develop players and they get that second contract or they get that third contract and they're still on your team, do they change? Do you change? How does that interaction work? Is Matt LaFleur's messaging, is it able to withstand all of the pressures that come with finding success with these young players? And I think that'll be, just from, you think about the Green Bay Packers, I think that'll be a really interesting thing to look for over the next couple of years as well. But with Jair, it's like, the guy did a great job for the Green Bay Packers. You can't do it. He got paid to do a job. He did it when he was healthy. He did it at a very, very high level, and a lot was expected of him. And you can't be anything but happy for him that he lands in a spot where he has a chance to win a Super Bowl.
Totally agree with that. There seems to always be a little bit of this murky area between injured and hurt, Mike, where if you're injured, you can't play. If you're hurt, you have to play through it. But there's this very seemingly, at least from the outside looking in, and that's why I want to ask you, because you were on the inside looking in, there seems to sometimes be this gray area where maybe the team feels like you're hurt and they want you to play, but the player says that they're injured and that they can't play. And there can be this real sort of just gap in how both sides view this. I think to a lesser extent, we saw with Bakhtiari, although I think we know Bakhtiari had a very serious injury. I think we saw it a little bit with Jair Alexander, but like the team needs players to play hurt, or they're just going to end up with, they're not going to have a team to go out there and play every single week. But players have to look out for themselves too. Heck, we saw we're recording this a week early here. We saw with Tyrese Halliburton, who tries to play through the injury for the Indiana Pacers in the final game. And pops his Achilles. Like if you play and you're injured, there's the odds of you getting a worse injury go exponentially up. So how does this dynamic work, and how do you navigate this as both a player and as a franchise when it's paramount that you play hurt, but if it's an injury, you really shouldn't be playing?
Yeah, so that's a big question. So I'm going to start by saying that Pat McKenzie has been the team doctor, and Dr. Gray have been the team doctors for as long as I can remember with the Green Bay Packers. And I've never been around more thoughtful, professional people in my life. And when my daughter got hurt, Pat was the first person I called. I trust them with my family. So I'll start by saying that, because that's not true with a lot of teams.
Sure.
And a lot of teams, like you said, the coaching staff, again, we always talk about perspective. A player's got 5 to 10 years of time. Coaches have 45 years of time. So the perspective of time is totally different. And they're looking for, we got to hit this job before we get fired. It is extremely difficult for a team doctor or somebody to tell you that how you should be playing given your injury.
Sure.
And I think that the thing that happens now, first of all, I don't think these players are going to play through injury as much as they used to, like as much as my group did. There's just no way. Their agents have told them you don't need to. These players would rather play 80% for 10 years than 100% for 8 years. That's just how they think about themselves and how they think about their career. So that notwithstanding, you just look at it from a team perspective now. It really depends on the injury. If I break, you play with a broken hand, well, who cares, right? You play with a broken. Now you play with a really strained calf that could lead to an Achilles, and you're a dynamic mover on the field. You got something to think about. Or you've got something that's limiting your ability to hit top speed, and you're a shutdown corner. You've really got something to think about. Or you got a shoulder injury that's not allowing you to punch or not allowing you to tackle. Those things are impeding your ability to play. And unfortunately, and this is a firsthand thing for me, is when I was in Carolina, I was playing injured with a blown out shoulder and pills, shots, whatever, just to get through practice.
Sure.
5 weeks into me playing injured, I go to the coach and I can't sleep. I can't play. I'm terrible. I'm literally holding my arm up on my pad. Like, what are we doing? Is there anybody else? You at 60% are better than the guy behind you. So you need to play. And it was like, that's the calculus. And they were unapologetic about it. We sit here now and you go, are you kidding me? But
right.
That's how they think about things. And so the fact that the Packers have, like Doc McKenzie there to pull the reins back and be responsible about it. You don't appreciate that, from the outside, as important that is to a guy like me as a player. But ultimately with these guys, I'm sorry I'm giving this long answer, but like Jair Alexander, if Jair Alexander is saying I can't play at the level required for me to feel like I'm giving my best, that's one thing. If he's saying I can't play well enough to help us win, that's something different. And then, trying to figure that out between team and player, I think is the hardest conversation to have.
It has to be. And it just feels like there's always a little bit of a gap there between, the player and the team and how they feel about the situation. Maybe not always, but certainly sometimes. And I think, you just got to be really careful with it because, again, as a player, I'll just follow up on one thing. When you had the injury in Carolina and then you become a free agent after that, obviously you have tape out there that's probably not as good because you're playing with a shoulder that doesn't work. Do teams take that into consideration and say hey, we understand that you were hurt and that's probably why maybe the tape wasn't as good? Or do they just look at the tape and be like, hey, you didn't have a good season, we're not going to pay you that much money? How do those conversations go? Because I would assume if you go out there and you're, again, 50% of yourself and it shows up on tape, when teams go to, again, potentially give you a contract or re-sign you or whatever that might be, I'm sure that they're pointing to that and being like, yeah, you weren't the same as you were previously.
Yeah, I mean, John Schneider was still with Green Bay. And he called me, I think, when I left Carolina, and we were having, some very, very preliminary conversations. But it was effectively like, your tape's not very good.
Sure.
Your tape from last year is not very good, and I can sit there and try to explain it away. But the reality is, the tape's there. And how many people are you able to talk to? Like, John's nice enough to call me, right? But most guys are just gonna be like, nah, no. And so and the other thing would be there. It's injury specific, right? So back in the day when you blew your ACL, people were like, oh, he's probably got 2 carry-on years and he's done. But then Adrian Peterson gets healthy in 6 months and runs for 2,000 yards, and everyone's like, oh, okay, I guess that's not a big deal anymore. Pretty soon we'll just be taking a pill for it. So I think all of that just goes into context. But when you're a personnel guy, you're looking at all of that and probably reading the report and then watching the film, seeing if it matches up. And then is there any historical precedence for okay, it's a hand injury. We know his hand's going to get better. It's not a big deal. It's a shoulder injury. It probably never heal again. We need to shut down. But if you're talking about just from a player standpoint, you're putting out bad tape. We're not idiots. You know what I mean? I knew that tape was bad. Jair Alexander knows that if he plays and there's bad tape out there, it's double whammy because they not only the Green Bay Packers all of a sudden not loyal to him, he's trying to be loyal to them by playing injured. They release him. And then he's like, and I have bad tape out there. So double whammy for me.
Yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic. And I think that's why there's so many layers to it. It's because the player, again, the player has a limited amount of time in the league that they have to try to make the most money that they can. This is a business for them. It's a business for the team. And it's never easy conversations to have, but I always understand it from both sides. It's a difficult scenario to kind of work through no matter what that injury is. As we get out of here, Mike, or before we get out of here, I kind of want to open to you. I'll let you go in a couple different directions here, wherever you want to go. Either like what are some things that you're going to be really keeping an ear to the ground to during training camp, of things that you're either looking for or want to hear, etc., or just maybe something that you're very intrigued by that nobody else is talking about that you remain very interested in. I'll let you go in any direction that you want.
Yeah. Well, let me follow up with that last one. Is like, can you imagine a scenario where you go, they go in and they say, okay, we want you to play hurt, and you go, I guarantee my contract, and they just said yes. You know what I mean? Like that. How
Yeah,
easy would that be to align
sure.
incentives? But you would never see that happen, would you? So
No,
it's
you would
like
not.
we always talk about this loyalty and this give take, but it really doesn't exist, right? We just do it for
Nope,
the narrative.
for sure.
So when we go to training camp, first of all, I think the biggest thing I would love to see is um, a departure from the way that we've been doing business the last however many years in camp, and really get down to let's win from the trenches out. Let's have a real physical training camp. Let's go ahead and put these guys through the ringer a little bit, and really test their mettle, and really develop the ability to play with great footwork, pad level, and hand placement, against our top guys, testing each other every day, kind of becoming the best version of yourself, like we used to do back in the day. And that doesn't mean playing the preseason or any of that stuff, but just really get back to let's do everything we can to help our teammates get better by giving them the best looks we can every single day. If it's ones on ones, twos on twos, I would love to see that. I'm sure we won't, but I would love to see that. And then I think, to piggyback off that, you'd love to see how this plays out. I'm not a big rotation fan. I just don't think it makes sense. I understand why they do it. And maybe with these kind of offenses, the offense that Matt runs, you don't need to have cohesion as much because there's so many different moving parts anyways. But then, just looking at like how that pass rush develops, I think we talked about it before, but the addition of a new D-line coach and pass rush specialist, and how the impact that he has on that defensive line, I think is really going to, in a large part determine how far this team goes anyways. So, how that shapes up during training camp and during the early part of the season, will really, I think that'll tell a great story.
Yeah, I think so too. Those are some of the battles and just some of the conversations that I'm going to certainly be keeping close on as I'm out there. Should be very fun to cover. And Mike, I'm sure we'll talk to it a lot about it along the way. And hopefully we get another chance to talk this season as well. But always great catching up with you. I always love picking your brain on so many of these topics. And anything else you got coming out in the near future? Anything you're going to be working on?
You know what? We're knee deep in some development stuff over in Europe right now. And as much as I like doing shows and tape and everything, between that and some of the stuff I got going over here, keep my head above water right now, man.
I joked with Mason Crosby, who does the Mason Crosby show immediately after my radio show in Milwaukee, because he obviously just retired from the NFL. And I said, Mason, I love you. You're incredible at everything you do. I said, you absolutely suck at retirement, because he has been all over the place doing every charity event, golf tournament, radio show, everything. And Mike, I hate to tell you, but you also suck at retirement. You're as busy as anyone that I know. I know you love the grind, but your retirement plan is terrible so far, my friend.
Yeah, it's everybody thinks they're going to go play golf, and then you're like, oh, I'm 32 years old. What am I going to do? What do I do when I'm 33? So you're trying to find something to do. Listen, the thing that we're really lucky about, Andy, is like we get to talk about something that we really just generally enjoy. A lot of people don't get to talk about stuff that they enjoy except for the water cooler, and we're lucky to be able to do this for sure.
I could not have said it any better, and I totally agree with you wholeheartedly. I know you got a lot going on, including a flight back to Germany, so safe travels to you. We will catch up very soon. Go follow him at Mike Wahle 68, and of course, Process to Perform YouTube channel. We'll talk again soon, Mike. You enjoy the rest of your offseason, I guess season in Germany, offseason from a Packers standpoint, and we'll catch up during the season.
All right, Andy. Thanks, man.
Again, for Mike and I, that's going to do it for us today. But until next time, and as always, of course, go Pack Go.